Well, the time has finally come. That 90s show is back for a third season. Or a second half of its second season. Honestly, it's hard to say based on the way Netflix is marketing these things. I mean, parts? Really? But having said that, Part 3 is by far the best part thus far. Which might in part be due to its director, as all 8 of these episodes were directed by original series original Laura Prepon. And I think that definitely helped matters. This is a much easier watch than Part 2, and it's a lot more entertaining than Part 1. It feels like the show is finally starting to stand on its own. It's surviving as its own unique thing. It hasn't forgotten about the past by any means, but it's not necessarily coasting off it. That 90s show has been establishing its own identity apart from its parent, which is good because when making a follow-up to a famous show, you don't want it to be married to its predecessor. You want it to be related to it, like a distant cousin, so to speak. But not so distant that you can marry it. You know what? The metaphor has eluded me. Let's just proceed.
I missed out on the whole thing, to be honest with you. I was confused by it. I was very confused by the whole thing, if I'm being honest.
The cast continue to get more comfortable as their characters, and any problems with previous performances are null and void. The cast seem to have perfected their parts. Each episode, it feels like they start to grow out of their blueprints more and more, feeling less like character types and more like actual characters. And it's not just the cast, because the comedy hits a lot better this time around as well. I mean, it's not laugh-out-loud hysterical like the sound effects desperately want you to believe it is, but it's funny enough in its own right.
I miss my old vacuum rat.
Do you know what might make you feel better? If we sang Happy Birthday to the Toaster.
We need to break up.
No.
I'm breaking up with you.
Right, and I said no.
I can tell when people have had sex. That guy over there just had sex in the parking lot.
With you?
Oh, you can do it too.
I don't want this to turn into some immature standoff.
It's not.
I'd rather die than get off this couch.
You sound like Clint Eastwood.
He sounds like me.
It's Judgment Day, bitches.
Just can't figure out how the heck this thing broke.
It just came off?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Yes.
Yes, you'll break up with me.
Nope.
I'm actually kind of impressed with how this show is coming into its own, because Part 3 is already leagues ahead of what it was in Part 1. This time around, we see a lot of shoutouts to the show's titular decade, and I feel like these references feel less cheap than they have previously. Attention's put on the Beanie Baby craze, the wrestling scene which was booming at the time, and there's even a scene showing the family sitting around the living room watching America's Funniest Home Videos. And all of these things were a part of my own particular childhood. Much more important than these callbacks is the context of these callbacks, because the show isn't stopping short to make mention of all these ancient relics. They're brought up naturally, either in passing or because they play into the plot at hand, which I think is a lot better than in Season 1 when they had to stop everything they were doing to try to call attention to something from the time period. This time around they go all out. Leia even gets to have her own deeply bizarre fantasy of Doug Funny. I honestly could have lived without seeing that, and I honestly wish that I did. There's also a couple of callbacks to that original series, and while these cameos and Easter eggs aren't plentiful, they do feel a lot more meaningful. Like how the show introduces Kelso's firstborn child and Jay's half-sister Betsy, who is one of my favorite new additions to this series. She is absolutely awful in the most awesome of ways. Much like her half-brother, I would say it seems like she's more of her father than she is her mother. She certainly has the prowess of her on-screen dad, but she's just a lot more manipulative, wrapping Nate around her finger and pitting him against her brother just because. To say that she's self-centered would actually be an understatement, as she makes it clear that she wants to be the center of everyone else's life as well. Betsy has an interesting sibling rivalry with her younger brother, and their banter leads to what might be one of my favorite interactions in the whole series, with the two mirroring the fanbase of the original show.
Dad stayed with my mom.
Not for those weird 3 years in the middle.
We don't talk about that!
There's also plenty of reoccurring returns. Fez's lifelong rival Fenton comes back, and he's still just as insufferable as ever. Sherry's former landlord is now working at a pawn shop, and proves to be a pain for Nikki, as her parents had pawned off her childhood guitar. Always the antagonist, Fenton ups his price when realizing the sentimental value it has to her, leading to Nate trading in his van in exchange for it. Fenton's a lot of fun here, but I think this character will always work best when played against Wilmer Valderrama, whose absence has still gone unannounced up until this point. He still works well in his own right as a reoccurring character, and I'm sure we'll see more of him in future installments. But without Fez, it feels like a part, and most importantly, the purpose of this character is completely missing. Mitch is back once again to put the moves on and creep out Donna, and he succeeds at the latter. I think Seth Green has become so over the top as this character that it makes his first performance in that original show feel tame in comparison, though that isn't a complaint. I actually think he matches the tone of this series perfectly, even if he dials his character down to being a caricature. He's still a lot of fun to watch. Mitch is now running a men's support group, which winds up being attended by Nate, Bob, Red, and most surprisingly, we even get an Earl Easter egg. For those of you who might not remember, Earl was a former coworker of Red's. He was a sad slacker that for a while became the bane of Red's existence, with him once even being nicknamed the New Eric. Earl is just as miserable as he ever was, though this time around he seems to have an affinity for fire, becoming a bit of a pyromaniac in between the decades. Bob's ex-wife Midge is mentioned, with Bob finding her belongings and having a bit of a breakdown, making it clear that much like her actress, Tanya Roberts, she's no longer with us. It's sad watching Bob get caught up in a past that he can never relive, but the story ends on a high note, with him learning to look back at it with fondness. Similarly, Laurie is also brought up in passing, with her presence feeling past tense, also much like her dearly departed actress as well, or at least one of them. I don't think we'll ever fully get clarity on those situations, but it's easy to understand the sentiment. I think this finds a really nice balance of paying homage to the past while using that past to pave the way for the present. I really appreciate that this series is taking older characters and doing new things with them. It's fun watching Red and Kitty trying to adapt to the decade, feeling like fish out of water in most cases, but still sometimes finding their footing. I personally loved watching the two get drunk together while being scolded like they were children by their daughter-in-law. Deborah Jo Rupp and Kurtwood Smith are always a highlight of this show, and they make even the worst episodes feel like they're worth watching. Donna takes on a much more motherly role in the background, and I'm not just talking about for her own child and her child's friends. She also has to parent her in-laws on several occasions as well, to hilarious results. In addition to a few familiar faces, there are also some brand new ones. Cedric Yarbo of Reno 911 fame plays Sherry's ex and Gwen's father, Otis, putting a rest to the long-running rumor that Hyde was in fact Gwen's father. And quite frankly, with the way that situation has gone, probably for the best to nip that fan theory in the bud. Otis is a well-meaning, carefree, and absent-minded guy. He's somewhat neglectful of his daughter, but that's not entirely intentional. Instead, he's written off as being an innocent buffoon. And because of all this, he comes off as the perfect partner for Sherry. It makes you wonder how these two crazy kids couldn't have worked things out, because they are a perfectly imperfect pairing. It's actually kinda refreshing to see that there's still a romance and more importantly a healthy relationship between the two. Very often in sitcoms, exes are depicted as enemies, and these two are anything but. Leo's son Sonny and his best bud Bunch finally play into the show a bit. While I enjoy their place in the series, I can't say that I love Kevin Smith's over-the-top hammy acting. It's a little bit much, and it really makes me yearn for the days when he didn't talk. Having said that, it's definitely interesting seeing a toned-down Jay and Silent Bob. I do think in short intervals they make for solid additions to the story, but at times this season it feels like they're a bit overexposed. Maybe because they're the new toys for writers to play with. I don't love them, but I don't necessarily hate them either. But I can say without a shadow of a doubt, this is not my favorite use of Jay and Silent Bob in a TV show. Sorry, that goes to Degrassi. The Miz has a somewhat fun, if not somewhat forgettable cameo as wrestling superstar The Party Animal, and I don't think that they did quite enough with this character. Miz's particular acting style feels perfectly in place for a show like this, so I really hope that they get better use of him in the future, assuming that they do in fact use him again in the future. Sherry Cola plays a coffee shop owner who asks for Red's aid in scaring away annoying customers, which winds up working a little bit too well, leading to her losing sales. I don't know how many of these characters will make a comeback in the future, but that seems to be part of the fun. I think that there's more than enough wiggle room to evolve these background players and have them play bigger roles later on. But it's also fine if they wind up just being one-off characters that serve the purpose of that particular plot. This season sees a lot of new developments for the new Point Place gang, especially in terms of their love lives, which seems to take center stage. Like for one, Leia and Jay actually seem to have a love life, as they decide to take their relationship to the next level, to the disgust of everyone around them. Now, a lot of the time when showrunners are writing couples, it comes down mostly to the chase rather than showcasing the actual relationship, which is mainly because, dramatically speaking, it's a lot more compelling watching the moments leading to a relationship rather than seeing the relationship blossom itself. When writers finally pair two characters together, typically they start trying to briefly take them apart, because there's more entertaining arcs and developments to explore when a character is stuck in the in-between. Writing couples can get boring, but to this show's credit, for the most part, Jay and Leia don't have a lot of these issues between them, and most of, if not all of their tiffs, wind up feeling short-lived and really forced for that time being. I can't emphasize this enough. Anytime these two are arguing, it takes me out of the whole show by just how illegitimate it feels. But that's fine, because even if there's not a lot of drama or tension between the two, it doesn't mean that they're not entertaining in their own right. They make for a cute couple, and their interactions are very wholesome in a young, dumb, and cringeworthy way. I think out of all the pairings this series has had to offer, at least in terms of the younger cast, they are by far the best. It didn't feel like they had much in common in the first season, but now it's become hard to imagine them apart. Though with the way this season closes off, that might be an inevitability. Speaking of couples calling things off, previously Nikki and Nate had split up and chosen to go their separate ways. In this half of the season, both parties find other significant others. Nikki winds up dating a theater kid named Theo, and Nate winds up seeing Betsy, to the chagrin of her brother/his best friend, Jay. While both relationships seem to look promising at first, they quickly fizzle out, and ultimately the couple get back together by the end of the season, in a really heartfelt and endearing way. Even Oz gets a boyfriend this time around, and sure, his love interest isn't all that interesting. Look, I know I just used that phrase before in another video, but the shoe still fits. At least they're trying to do something with this character. I think their brief time together is kinda wholesome, but there's not a whole lot of chemistry between the two. One of them doesn't even really feel like a character yet, which is a problem I find with a lot of the short-term romances that a lot of the gang find themselves in. Most pairings outside of the main cast don't make much of an impression. These two remind me of Gwen and her last boyfriend whose name I can't even remember. On the subject of Gwen, she's now left as the odd man out. She has no story arc and no direction whatsoever, which is a little disappointing, because I think her actress has gotten a lot better in the role since the first season. It's not just that she doesn't have a partner, she doesn't have a purpose or plot for 7 out of 8 of these episodes. I feel like given the structure of the show and the amount of stars on it, someone is always going to be left out. Now typically in the first show, it was usually Fez. But this time around, it seems like the cast is playing a game of musical chairs in terms of relevance. This has been a major improvement. And while I look forward to seeing where the show is headed, admittedly, there are some things I'm still not really loving. Like the laugh track can be a little much a lot of the time, and the background audio outside of that can be lacking most of the time. Like when they're out at a bar, the music is nearly muted when they're all supposed to be dancing to it. The green screens are beyond blatant, though those are always harder to work with when you're using elements like smoke. There's a couple things that also confuse me creatively speaking. Like the last part ends with Jay and Not-So-Silent Bob crashing through the kitchen wall, and this part starts with the gang desperately trying to fix things before the Foremans get back home. When they do inevitably find the hole in the wall, the kids act like it was their doing, except it wasn't. I get that this happened at one of their parties, but that really could have been stricken from the record altogether. They're not the ones who drove a car through the kitchen, so them taking the fall for it really makes no sense whatsoever. Despite all of this, like I said at the beginning of the video, without question, Part 3 has been the best part so far. The cast seem to be shedding their Disney Channel Nickelodeon style of acting in favor of something much closer to the original series that they're trying to emulate. And the show itself is no longer surviving off nostalgia. Well, I guess technically it still is, just nostalgia for the decade it's based in and not nostalgia for the cast who worked on the original show in the decade that it's based in. As opposed to focusing primarily on the past, it's putting focus on its future. And it's doing a good job of that to its credit. The characters are more fleshed out and just overall more fun. The situations and stories they find themselves in are more entertaining, and I'm finally at the point where I actually care about the new Point Place posse. I really hope the show continues at this quality of creative. If they can do this consistently, they really have something good here. Is it better than that 70s show? No, of course not. But it's good as its own thing. I don't think the show should be viewed as the successor to that 70s show, but instead its somewhat successful offspring. And I, for one, am a fan of this family. With that being said, if you like this video and want to see me cover future installments in the franchise, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Think 90s.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bad time. Same bad channel.